Jennifer wants to know, who do you think is creating what could potentially be the next generation of myths, legends, fairy tales, and who are writers going to be referencing in their stories in 200 years? Let me zoom out.
Can you do the ooh thing again for Jennifer?
Woo!
Robin McKinley.
Oh my God.
Some of the most amazing retellings. And Jim C. Hines actually has this series, the princess ones, where princesses are very kick-ass. But they also have their very tragic backstories, and I just absolutely love those.
They are awesome.
Yeah, they were actually part of the inspiration for me to do this. So.
When I got asked this question, I thought a lot about, because Robin McKinley, Patricia McKillop, they're all, you know, great grand favorites. But 100 years from now, like, what is going to stick around 100 years from now? Harry Potter, I honestly believe will. And to be fair, any incarnation of like NCIS or CSI, I mean, this whole crap, right? Yeah. We're going to be retelling those types of criminal stories.
Supernatural.
For 100 years. We just, they are. In some way, shape, or form, that is my prediction.
And I'm going to have to third on Robin McKinley. I think she's amazing. I think Jacqueline Carey is doing amazing work that she doesn't get as much credit for. I think Kate Elliott is doing wonderful work. They're not exactly fairy tale stuff, but they're using a lot of those same kinds of archetypal legends. And also Grace Strader, and she's a friend of mine, but I really love what Grace is doing with taking fairy tale things.
I have to say George R. R. Martin. I have to. You know, I read him 10 years ago, and I always said this would be phenomenal on the screen. It was probably one of the best adaptations from book screen. It's amazing. It's amazing. But it's just, and it all goes back to the characters. Phenomenal character development. Tyrion, you know, phenomenal. So when you can invest people in some characters like that, it's going to be retold. So George R. R. Martin.
And I agree with Alethea in Harry Potter that when that broke, when kids started lining up outside bookstores in an electronic age at midnight to buy a 300-page book and wanted to leave school for 3 days to finish it, that changed everything.
And it wasn't just kids too; it was their parents that were wanting to read it as well.
No, I mean, I was in college. I had gone back to get my doctorate, and I had grad school classmates that were skipping classes during the week to stay up all night and read the books, which tells you a lot about the psychology profession. But to me, it was a huge cultural shift in that we always knew those stories were there. For those of us who, you know, kind of live in that slightly off world, we were happy to see it go mainstream. But for a lot of people who didn't know, or who had forgotten those stories, and you know that good can fight evil, and that it can start out with a little kid, and that you can be special. I think for a lot of kids growing up in a world where everybody can kind of look alike online, finding stories where you can be unique, and being unique is a good thing, to me was just a huge thing to see. So I think that rolls over into, it kind of opened a lot of doors. Without that book and those movies coming out, there's a lot of things that wouldn't be on TV today. And so to me, I think that was a huge game changer.
I agree. I'll have to say definitely Game of Thrones and then Harry Potter. A lot of people are going to be retelling those over and over in 200 years, and it's probably going to be something else so just far-fetched and amazing. It's going to be like, oh, we're going to have to see it. But I'm looking at you right now.
I like that you think we're going to be around in 200 years.
No, I just
So you got a secret in there somewhere in those stories in that book.
just watching out. But yeah.
Well, let's flip this question around. What stories have been around for 200 years, but they're just not relevant anymore? There's not been a really good way of translating it into a contemporary setting.
For me, I would have to say it's going to be a lot of the African mythology. You don't see that. It's not very prevalent these days. And think that if you really look at the stories and the heart of the stories, it's really hard to bring it to light without it coming off either offending someone or being a little bit too harsh, because they're very, very dark stories, and they do have like there is a silver lining, but not always, because
Do you think that's also because it's more focused in African culture, and it wouldn't translate worldwide, or?
Because you've got Afro-Caribbean,
right?
You've got Afro-Spanish. I mean, there's all these different takes that you can do, and you know, I can call 3 people off the top of my head right now from all 3 different cultures, and they can tell you the exact same story, and they all have different endings. They're all not good endings. Like, not one of them are happily ever afters. And you know, a lot of people don't want to read the bad stuff. They want to say, okay, oh my God, the heroine is she's come through at the end of the tunnel, and there's a light there. But in a lot of that culture is steep. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. It's just you know, blood and guts, and I'm sorry, you're gonna die.
I'm so depressed.
but it's true though. I mean, I've seen it even. I've done a story where I sent off to one of my betas, and it was basically about one of the African gods, and you know, he's very well endowed, he's very sexy, and he just goes, he's rapey. Well, what can I say? Very rapey guy. And I tried to turn around. She's like, no, Tigris, this is just not gonna work. She's like, it's very offensive. And I was like, okay, thanks. I need to hear that. So it's really hard, but I will tell you, flip side, I told the story to my kids, and then I flipped it around because we're having that sex education talk, and I was like, this is what it's gonna look like if you do this. It works. People don't want to read that. People don't want to read that. I don't even want to read that.
Save the gold mine.
Now, I can't think of anything specific, but I think Iris touched on the right idea, which is you can't just leave everybody dead in a bloodbath, although you could want to. The backlash that we all saw after the wedding at George R.R. Martin, you know, that came out, and the people who had read the book were like, duh. And the people who hadn't read the book were just like having holy hissy fits. And there are certain themes of incest, pedophilia, rape, violence that are very much a part of our culture. And in some places, I mean, we're all women in here. We know exactly what that culture has done, because every single one of us thinks twice before we walk out the door. If it's dark, we'll go to grocery stores, but we won't go to the 7-Eleven after dark. So, I mean, those stories are real and they have a good basis, but there's such a backlash from them that they don't make it into like books and movies and things like that. Those are the ones that end up solely on the news.
Yeah, that's very true.
I think that is it my turn? I think that applies to all literature 200 years ago, because we were a different culture 200 years ago, and there was prejudice, and that's a debate that comes up with like the Mark Twain books. I'm a librarian, I do not believe in censorship, but it's like, how can we teach children? Is it right to put that prejudice into the minds of children, or do we wait to do it when they're fully adults? And I don't have the answer to that, because I would want that in the reading class as an adult to do, you know. So anything of those things that have prejudice in it, feminism 200 years ago, we're strong women now. And 200 years ago, it was very male dominant, where we've come forward. And that's and women are readers. Women are the dominant readers. So we're looking for strong women to lead that. And one of the things I retired from the library, and my first book came out, and they just had, my library at home just had a bunch of people, had a bunch of librarians that retired, and they're like, you just came in and filled in for 6 weeks while we hired and trained. I'm like, absolutely. They called me at the right time. And my question I asked everyone was, what was the first erotic book you've ever read? And it was Not 50 Shades of Grey. What was the first erotic book you've ever read? And the number one was Lady Chatterley's Lover.
Yeah.
And I hadn't read it, so I went back and read Lady Chatterley's Lover. And I was surprised at the prejudiced comments that were in it. It was banned. It wasn't even allowed to be printed, and it was so mild compared to it wasn't even erotic to me. It was so mild, and it was banned 100 years ago, and they wouldn't even allowed to print it until I think the 70s.
Well, I think it was banned partly not because of the sexual content, but because it was going to give women uppity ideas about. Yeah, that they were free to can't have that.
No. So, and that was like really not law. You know? So look how far we've come since the 70s. So.
I guess I'm going to say that while maybe the complete tale becomes dated in the ways that these ladies have brought up, I'm still going to go back to this idea of tales being adapted and broken down and the parts used in new things. I don't think that there are stories that are not relevant at all. I do think, like you're talking about, Tigris, with changing the endings, like whether people want a happy ending. Back to my favorite subject, me and my work.
I promise the next question.
Well, when I wrote this Goose Girl retelling, if you're not familiar with the fairy tale, and this is, I figure this is not a spoiler because this is a classic fairy tale, right? She has a talking horse and the horse dies. And they cut off the horse's head and hang it over a gate that she passes through.
I maintain Falada never died because Falada was magic, but be that as it may.
Right. And we would make these choices.
No horses really died in this story.
Yeah. This is exactly what happened. One of my crib partners, I sent her the story, and she came back and she said, I really, really feel like the horse shouldn't die. She said, I think the readers are going to push back on that. And you know how romance readers are about animals dying. It's like one of the cardinal rules. She said, you just can't kill the horse. And I went back and forth on this, and I actually talked to all the other authors in the anthology.
I'm like, is she going to kill the horse?
I'm
glad you didn't kill the horse.
Well, I kept coming back to how can you not kill the horse?
I know.
Because that's the pivot of that story. So yeah, maybe you get into the magical. He's not really dead.
I maintain Falada did not die. Because Falada continued to speak and had a bigger part, actually, after she or he was severed.
I made her a female in mine.
I as well. Mine was female. But never did. So here it is. The thing in literature that is pretty much already dead, and it's really sad because you don't realize it until you talk to lots of 11-year-olds. Mother Goose rhymes.
Oh, that's right, yes.
Mother Goose rhymes. And I know this because the whole Books of Airland, the Woodcutter Sister series, is based on Monday's child is fair of face, Tuesday's child is full of grace, and because all the sisters are named after the days of the week. And the kids, I get asked this all the time if I made up that poem.
Wow.
And while I love to take credit and say thank you very much, that is all, it's dying off because we have new ways of teaching. They were originally, many of them were for phonics and to teach children how to speak and how to read.
Or
and we have different ways. There were politics, Peter Pumpkin Eater, I forget who that was based on, How to Wife and Couldn't Keep Her. Topical discussions, Ring Around the Rosie, Pocket Full of Posy. We all know what that was about. But the kids today, it's a history lesson for them, and it's not something that is told in the nursery anymore, and it's not something that lots of adults, Tigris being an exception, tell to their children anymore. And I did not realize that. That was a big rude awakening when I based many of my stories on fairy tales and nursery rhymes. The Old Woman That Lived in a Shoe. Only a few people noticed that one because it's just not told anymore. And it's sad that in 200 years those will be gone. But that's, I'm afraid, one of the things that is dying.
See, I gave all those books to my friends' kids and to my nieces and nephews. Good. So there's a little trickle there. Don't. I think any story involving a virgin. I'm sorry, but go.
I can hope that those die off.
Well, but I mean, go to the middle school. It's like at what point are those still relevant in a society where kids are having sex very, very early, and even if they are physically virgins, they do not have that innocence. They lose that innocence very, very early. And I think, unfortunately, those stories are no longer relevant except as a wistful thing told by parents.
Or as unlikely romance novels.
Right, exactly. Oh, yes, the 22-year-old virgin bride, and everybody's like...
As a medical professional, I can tell you, so true. I had an 11-year-old give birth.
See, this is what I'm saying. That's a whole different fairy tale.
Yes.